I am so excited to talk about every book that I read in February of 2024. Hi, welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for watching this video and clicking on this video. I am going to give you guys some stats to start off with. For the month of February, I read 11 books. I would really like to thank the app Storygraph for giving me all of these stats. I am a very stats-oriented person. I love analytics, I love stats, I love looking at numbers, I love looking at lists, and Storygraph is one of the best, probably honestly the only best statistical book app that I know about. And if you like to read and you like to keep track of the things that you read, definitely download Storygraph, okay? I read 11 books that equaled out to 4,032 pages. For mood and pace, I read 8 books that were labeled as emotional, and that was my biggest mood, I guess, from last month. I mean, I'm a pretty emotional person. Maybe I was going through it last month, who knows. 45% of the books that I read were between 300 and 500 pages. Romance, surprisingly, I mean, maybe not surprisingly since it was February, that's like Valentine's Day, but romance was my most read genre of last month with 8 books, and fantasy was right behind it with 7 books. My average rating for February was 3.18 stars. By the way, I don't rate books half stars. I rate movies half stars because in a movie there's so much to comprehend. It's like easier to decide if I want to give a half-star review. For books, I like to just make the decision of, is this a 4-star book or is this a 3-star book? Instead of like trying to weigh options, I know what I like, I know what's good to me, and so I just rate it flat, 1-star, 2-star, 3-star, 4-star. So just so you guys know, that's a little bit of my rating system. Okay, so the first book that I read in February was Nettle and Bone by T. Kingfisher. This was my first T. Kingfisher book. She's known to be like the mother of fantasy, and I totally see it, especially like high fantasy, not like this kind of modern romantasy trend that you see a lot going on nowadays. She's like a high fantasy writer, but for like YA from what I've seen. I mean, she probably has some adult books, but Nettle and Bone was definitely YA, definitely high fantasy. The romance was not an important part of it, although what romance there was very cute and very endearing. I really liked it. One good thing about this book is that it's clear that the author really relies on the reader to be smart enough to figure out the book, which is great. I love that so much. Like, I hate when things are over explained because the author doesn't think that we're smart enough. Biggest pet peeve. And Nettle and Bone is definitely like, you just read it and either you're gonna get it or you're not, because they're not gonna explain it for you. You just have to have comprehension skills, and it's nice. This is a story about a girl who goes on a mission and she makes a lot of friends along the way. She's kind of witchy, she befriends a witch, she meets a boy, she actually saves the boy. And all in all, this book is a revenge book. It is a revenge love story between her and her sister. Her sister has been married by the prince and he is not treating her well, so the main character decides to step in and cause some revenge, and it's a very satisfying book. Fun read, very quick to read. I gave it 3 stars because I had a great time. I definitely want to read more of T. Kingfisher's books in the future, and hopefully there's going to be one there that just like really sits with me, that I really, really love, that has like every aspect that I love. This one had a lot of really good things like revenge. I definitely would recommend it to any fantasy reader out there, especially if you're looking for a good YA book. Next, I read Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. This is the first book in the Letters of Enchantment series, and I think it's just a duology right now. I know that the second one is out and I have yet to read it, but it's on my TBR, and I will get to it. This was such a good workplace rivals to lovers. Like, if that's your thing, if you love a good workplace rivals to lovers, yes, read Divine Rivals. I'm so serious. He falls first in this book. That's probably why it works so well for me, because I love when the man falls first, okay? I love the characters. I loved her. I loved him. I love the side characters. There's a cliffhanger that's very good. I definitely, like, I'm surprised I haven't picked up the second book yet because the cliffhanger is still sticking in my head. It's just I've been busy, but I can't wait to get back into it. This is a story about Iris and Roman. They work at the same newspaper and they are like fighting to have like the best articles to write. It's a little fantasy. It's kind of like dystopian fantasy, I would say. There's a war going on like on the front lines, and Iris really shows her bravery by quitting this esteemed writing at the newspaper job that she had to go write for a different newspaper where they actually have their writers go to the front lines and like report on what's actually going on in the war. So she shows bravery, and Roman like really looks up to her for that. She has a magical typewriter. Okay, here's the fantasy element. She has a magical typewriter that she can write notes to, like she writes letters to it. It's kind of like a diary, like a therapy session. And then if she puts them under her wardrobe, they disappear. And they disappear. So she's just kind of like, okay, there's some magic here. I'm just writing this to the void. Turns out someone is getting the letters, and they start to write her back, and we'll go from there. I gave Divine Rivals 4 stars. Next, I read Feybound by el-arifi. This is the first book in the Feybound series, and I kind of did a book review for this book already. I'll link that video down below. I really went into like more of my issues with the book, and less so than like an analytical approach of the book or like a really like in-depth book review. I just talked about my issues with it. So like if you want to know more about the book, or if you read the book and you want to hear my take on it, like my full take on it, just watch that video down below. So I am part of this app called Fable. I'm part of 2 book clubs on there, just for funsies. I don't respond or like talk to anyone. I just like read the book that they're reading. And it's a Swiftie book club, okay? So it's just like the Swifties who read book club on the Fable app, and Feybound was the February pick for that month, so that's why I read it. Basically, these 2 elven sisters, they are cast out in a way to the Fey world, and they just kind of like learn that everything that they thought they knew about their world, about the elves, about the fairies, about the humans and everything, isn't what they thought. So it's a very like introspective, like learning new things. There is a lot of romance in it. It's definitely romance heavy, I would say. So I ended up giving Feybound only 2 stars because I couldn't connect with any of the characters. I hated a lot of the dialogue, and overall I just really didn't like it. I thought that the writing, there was like good writing in it, but the dialogue never sit well with me, and like I said, I could not connect with any of the characters. Next, I read Dipped in Holly by Dana Isali. This is the first book in the Nick and Holly series. It's smut, and I read it because it's smut. I gave it 3 stars. Next, I read Acts of Desperation by Megan Nolan. So this book is about a girl who is stuck in a really toxic relationship. It's very depraved. I mean, like, it's very like rated MA, rated NSFW. It's very like, she does a lot of things, she goes through a lot of things. It's very like trigger warning heavy. Like if you are someone who gets triggered easily, definitely look out for the trigger warnings of this book. Like do some research before you read it. It's a very depraved book, and the ending is honestly hard to swallow. I loved the ending, but I hated how we had to get to the ending. It like makes me sick to the stomach. Like still at the same time, it's a very relatable book for like what it's like to be stuck in a relationship where you don't see your worth and your partner is like literally taking over your life, like literally ruining your life, and you just like have no like sense of autonomy, you have no sense of your own self. And like if you've ever been in a relationship like that, like this book is very relatable, and it's like hard to read something like that when you've like experienced a relationship like this. So definitely tread carefully, but I really, really liked it. I gave it 4 stars because I just related to it. It was very well written, and something I found is that I love when books have short chapters. Like if the chapters are like a page or 2 long, I could sit there and read that in like just a couple hours and have a great time, because my attention span is just like being serviced these short chapters. I don't know, it just like it works so much better than knowing like I have to dedicate like 25 pages to this chapter. I can't get up for 25 pages, but it's like, oh, how many chapters can I read with these short chapters? It's this is a short chapter book, yeah, and I give it 4 stars, and I liked it. Next, I read The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. So I started a little challenge for myself where I would read my followers from Instagram, my followers' favorite books of 2023, and at the beginning of the year, I asked on Instagram, what were your favorite books of 2023? And The Song of Achilles was someone's pick, so I'm reading that for like a future video, okay? So I don't have a lick of knowledge when it comes to mythology, Achilles, the gods, Zeus, literally literally anything. Like, I read Percy Jackson growing up, but that doesn't mean that I remember everything that I read, and I definitely haven't studied mythology. So I'm not here to pick apart this book because I don't have the knowledge or the right to. I'm not here to rip it apart for its historical inaccuracies, which I think is a little silly anyways because it's a fiction book, but I just don't have that knowledge, so I'm not going to talk about anything like that. So this is the story of Achilles and Patroclus. Is that how you say his name? They're like, in mythology, they're like close, like very close besties, and they like work together, and Patroclus kind of is very sacrificing to Achilles in mythology from what I understand, and so this is just like a different take on that story. The ending had me in shambles, okay? It was so tense. It was so sad. Like, there's something that you're waiting to happen at the end, and the character is just sitting there waiting for it to happen, and with every character that the person interacts with, you think it's going to happen for them, but then it doesn't, so you're like, oh my god, is he ever going to get this resolve that he needs? And I was tensed. I was very tensed up for those final like 15 pages or final 2 chapters, epilogue, like whatever it be. I was scared. I was very scared for this book. So I gave it 3 stars because it is a good book. It, however, didn't stick with me. It was difficult for me to like make myself sit down and read it because it's not the kind of book that I would typically go for. And I honestly only read it because it was part of that Your Favorite Books of 2023 series. But I knew that I was going to read it eventually because it was so popular when it came out a couple years ago. And so like, I love knowing what's popular. I love knowing what the people like. And so I was going to read it on my own, but only due to the popularity of it. So I'm glad that I read it. I had a good time reading it, but I didn't enjoy sitting down to read it. Like, it was not my first pick whenever I wanted to read, okay? Okay, next I read Twilight by Stephenie Meyer, the first in the Twilight series. Y'all already know, link down below, there's a whole Twilight video down there for you guys to watch because I read all the Twilight books and I watched all the Twilight movies, and then I did a little analysis, did a little what I like, what I didn't like, and that video is down there. I did not expect myself to fall in love with the reread of Twilight, the first book, but I really did. I really loved reading this book again. I gave it 3 stars because Stephenie Meyer is not a good writer. I'm sorry. Next I read Boy Parts by Eliza Clark. This was so gross, and I loved it. It's about an artist who sexualizes men. She totally flips the narrative of male photographers who only photograph nude women and put them in suggestive situations and suggestive content like photos by doing the same thing to men though. It's crazy because in this book she gets away with everything. Like, she's doing like deplorable acts, like she is being a bad person, okay, like a legitimate like criminal, and she's getting away with it kind of the way that a lot of men do in our society, and she's just sitting there the whole time like, can't you see what I'm doing? Like, can't you, like, look at me, I'm literally committing a crime here, I'm showing you the evidence of my crime. And everyone in her world is just like not listening, not looking, or just being like, oh, what crazy pictures you took, wow, those look so great. And the whole time like a deplorable act is happening in the photos, or like someone's literally being killed. So the whole book, she suffers no consequences for ruining any of the men's lives that she ruins in this book. And it's a total flip of the truth that men get away with a lot of things in life. They don't suffer a lot of consequences that women are like held to a totally higher standard for. It's a good book because she's also an unreliable narrator, because so like maybe she actually did suffer consequences and maybe in her mind she thinks that she's getting away with everything. I don't know. I really liked it. I give it 4 stars because it was just such a refreshing book, like such a new book. It's very graphic. It's very like, look up trigger warnings for it, okay? But I know that I enjoyed reading it. I really liked her character, and I liked the concept of her being a man in a man's world, you know? It really sat well with me, and I enjoyed it. Next, I read New Moon from the Twilight Saga. It's the second book by Stephenie Meyer. This book, it literally has grammar mistakes. Like, it was not edited at all. It was literally written and then published. I swear to God. There's no way that this many mistakes could be published in a book. I was appalled when I read it. It gets points though because the way that she writes Bella and Jacob's relationship is so much better than the way that she wrote Bella and Edward's relationship in the first book. Her and Jacob are so believable, and then her and Edward, you're still just kind of like, huh? Like, he doesn't give the same good vibes that Jacob gives. Jacob gives like good boyfriend vibes, good best friend vibes, good protector vibes, and Edward is it's hard because in the first book you're just getting so much information, so there's not enough time for Edward to be this doting wonderful boyfriend, whereas Jacob does have the time in the second book. Next, I read The Age of Innocence by Edith Wharton. So I talked about how I'm in 2 book clubs on the Fable app. The other one is another Swiftie book club, if you can believe it. It's classics for Swifties, so we just like read a classic every month, and this one was The Age of Innocence. I've seen the movie before, and I swear to God it ends differently. Like, I swear I remember it ending so different, and I really need to rewatch it. I actually own it on like the Criterion, so I will be rewatching that to confirm whether or not the endings are different. Basically, it's about this man, Newland Archer. He is a New York socialite of the Victorian era, and he gets caught in a love triangle. What I loved about this book was that he was so delusional. Okay, he was delusional this whole book, I swear to God. Because, so we hear his thoughts, like we're in his head the whole book, and he's just talking about people and assuming about people and just like creating total situations and scenarios that haven't happened, and he's just believing everything that he's thinking. He's like, oh, clearly this is what they're thinking about, so this is how I'm going to respond to this. It's crazy though, because it doesn't ever like come to bite him in the butt, because everyone is so consumed with themselves. They're only thinking about their own situations, their own conversations, their own thoughts about what conversations could or would mean. So like, he's making assumptions and he's living in his delusional own world, but like everyone else around him is too. So no one is ever calling anyone out. Like, I never said that, why would you assume that about me? Kind of like how we would in today's society. Everyone is just literally living in their own world in this book. It's a good book to have a wake-up call on the thought that people are constantly judging you, that people are constantly thinking about you. I know that that's something that I have had to overcome as an adult, is like thinking about what other people are thinking about me. That is like, that was one of my biggest fears ever, and I would be literally, like in this book, consumed with what I thought other people were thinking and judging me for. And you know, you just really have to remember that everyone is literally thinking about themselves. If you think that they're thinking about you, chances they are not, and they are only thinking about themselves, because that's just how the world works. Like, we are always thinking about ourselves, so like, why wouldn't the other person also be thinking about themselves? Like, don't assume they're thinking about you, don't assume they're thinking bad about you even. Like, if you cross their mind, it's probably a fleeting thought that then goes into a thought about their own self, okay? I gave this book 3 stars. Okay, up next we have Eclipse, the 3rd book in the Twilight Saga by Stephenie Meyer. Okay, Stephenie Meyer brought Jacob up to a marble pedestal in New Moon, and then crushed his hopes and dreams with a sledgehammer in this book. She couldn't believe that some of y'all were Team Jacob, and she had to put a stop to that right quick. So basically in this one, Edward gets a rewrite. He becomes the better boyfriend and the better option for Bella, and Jacob literally assaults Bella. Oh my gosh, literally that was the last book I read. The last book I read in February was Eclipse. I'm such a mood reader, so like I will stop reading books. I'll be like 25% of the way through and I'm like, I don't feel like reading the rest of this. I want to read a romance, or I want to read a little thriller, or I want to pick up a fantasy. I want to read my fan fiction, like literally anything. And so I would have like 4 books on rotation and I wouldn't be able to finish them before the end of the month. So like, for March's wrap up, I'm going to have a lot more books, unfortunately, just because I started so many books at the end of February and I didn't sit and finish any of them because I was like halfway through all of them. Like, it's just how I like to read, okay? It's just how my process works for now. But those were all of the books that I read in February. I hope that you enjoyed this video. I hope that maybe you had a good recommendation or 2 from this list. I would definitely say if you want a fantasy book from the ones that I read in February, read Nettle and Bone. Nettle and Bone, amazing fantasy. If you want a quote-unquote femcel book, a quote-unquote depraved actions, a quote-unquote girl does not act how society wants her to act, read Boy Parts by Eliza Clark. If you want a good start to a new series, absolutely read Divine Rivals. I'm so serious. Like, if you want a different kind of fantasy, a more modern type of fantasy, not so much high fantasy, read Divine Rivals. And that was my February 2024 wrap up. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!